ask ourselves, what has the globalist economy gotten the United States of America? And the answer is fundamentally it's based on two principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture. That is not a recipe for economic prosperity, it's not a recipe for low prices, and it's not a recipe for good jobs in the United States of America.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things that the Chinese peasants manufacture. It is a provocative simplification of U.S.-China economic relationship, and it also reflects a specific worldwide view about American state and the trade imbalances and globalization. So what this means economically. So we borrow money, so let's talk about it from the economical point of view. The US, of course, we've been talking about this, runs a budget deficit and funds its spending by issuing treasury bonds. That's how they fund their spending, by issuing these treasury bonds. And who buys the treasury bonds? The latest update is that China holds the biggest treasury bonds. I know in the last video I said it was Japan, but China has overtaken Japan on the treasury, who holds the treasury bonds. So China buys those bonds, meaning it lends money to the US government. So the US borrows from China directly or indirectly. So another issue statement that's really people were concerned about was these Chinese peasants. Yes, this is a very profound and a very rhetoric type of statements that is rooted in a lot of views across the USA about Chinese peasant, and just generally the perception that people who are working in these factories are actually low labor, unskilled. But we're going to listen now to to Apple CEO to tell us why they have their factory in China. It's nothing to do with this peasants, Chinese peasants sort of a statement from J.D. Vance, but it is a rhetoric. It implies that Chinese working class, they are rural labor, factory workers. They produce cheap goods, saves money, and those savings end up in U.S. debt via state-controlled bank and sovereignty funds. So this is what they mean from Chinese peasants because of the money, the debt that the bonds that China holds on U.S. debt. But this peasant, the Chinese peasant term itself, as we put it under the code Chinese peasant, it's rooted in that long-held perception about China being filled by low-skilled labor, which is not true at all. And we're going to listen now to the CEO of Apple, and to give you guys some understanding for those of you who don't understand this, because I know there's some people either are not aware of it, but that this is not at all like that. There's a lot of engineering, a lot of people with skills in China, and that's why the companies go to China. It's nothing to do with the low-skilled labor sort of stuff like Chinese peasant term being used in the statement by J.D. Vance. So, okay, let's listen.
There's a confusion about China, and let me at least give you my opinion. The popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor cost. I'm not sure what part of China they go to, but the truth is China stopped being the low labor cost country many years ago. The reason is because of the skill, the quantity of skill in one location, and the type of skill it is. Like the products we do require really advanced tooling, and the precision that you have to have in tooling and working with the materials that we do are state of the art. And the tooling skill is very deep here. In the US, you could have a meeting of tooling engineers, and I'm not sure we could fill the room. In China, you could fill multiple football fields. It's that vocational vocational expertise is very deep, very, very deep here. There's a confusion.
So to buy things that Chinese peasants manufacture, the U.S. imports massive volumes of goods, clothing, electronics, furniture that are manufactured by Chinese labor, including rural migrants in factories. Like I said, iPhones. Apple had to send about 6 private planes to collect those phones, but it looks like Trump has finally backflipped on his policy. Now it looks like the iPhones, electronics are going to be exempt by these tariffs, which are ridiculous tariffs. But he's the one now is bowing to, these tariffs are tariffs imposed by USA to the world, and they're his policies. They're him who initiated this stuff. Nobody asked for it, but he's backflipping now. He's back into allowing some of these electronics to be imported without any tariffs, because these electronics aren't going to be produced tomorrow or even the next 5 years in America, because it takes a long time to build a factory, and you're not going to start today and build a factory and plan for it. It's it's almost like he stopped the trade without any plan. He hasn't put any plan in place, any order, or to try and reestablish any manufacturing base in America. None of that. He hasn't done any of that. So how is going to do that if America doesn't have any labor force, skills, a labor force? They don't have that in America. So what is he going to do? How are these companies going to produce these products in mass? Because you need to produce these products for the world. And if you have a place like China where there's a lot of engineer that can build the football field, as they say. So, and in America, it's just a few of those. So what are you going to do? What is this company going to do? So this is a problem with these policies that are unplanned and actually planned properly, because you don't just come up and just switch things off and change the laws and, change the rules and do all of this stuff. People aren't happy. People aren't going to be happy about it. Countries aren't going to trust you.
Change his mind.
When they make the decision to slap the tariffs on everybody with the magic chart, with no clue about what it means economically and so on, the stock market reacts with the fact these guys are morons. That's what the stock market did on Thursday and Friday. It just suddenly tanked. And then we were talking about the most serious drops in the market since the pandemic, right? That on all 3 major U.S. stock exchanges, the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, they all are approaching what we call a bear market, that they'll be more than 20% off their top value. They just narrowly, I think, avoided it. Now, all 3 those markets are plummeting on Thursday and Friday. So over the weekend, what you get is you get a division in the Trump camp that comes out in light of this. There's one faction in the Trump camp who are, let's call them the warrior protectionist. They want to rip up the international trading system. And they almost want to go to what is economic isolationism, that the United States can do it on its own, and they can do it by bullying other countries and pressing other countries into giving them the trade agreements that they want. Now, this includes Peter Navarro, who was very prominent in U.S. media, including last weekend. This includes the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer. It probably includes another influential Trump advisor named Stephen Miller. Now, there's another group in the Trump administration who are much more measured in their approach. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the head of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. And that is, all right, yeah, we want to use tariffs, but we want to use tariffs as leverage to get into trade negotiations in a much more measured way with the various folks. When the stock market goes down over the weekend, those guys, it's like, well, look, you got to pull back on this. On Monday of this week, Kevin Hassett went on to Fox Business And he actually said there might be a 90-day pause in the tariffs, right? And the stock market went up like 4%, boom, just like that. And then the White House came out and said, oh, no. This was misinterpreted. That's because the warrior protectionists kicked back. It said, no. As Peter Navarro then went onto media and said throughout the rest of Monday, no negotiations, no negotiations. Now, as late as Tuesday night, talking to the Republican National Committee and donors, Donald Trump said, all these countries, they can kiss my backside. He actually used a different word, but you can fill that in yourself. They can kiss my backside. He said that on Tuesday night. And I'm sorry, but I just need to tell you this because it just kicks all this stuff into touch. What happened on Tuesday night going into Wednesday is there was a run on the U.S. bond market. And by a run, what I meant is everybody was trying to dump their U.S. bonds. They were trying to sell them. Japan, twice, I've got this on high authority, Japan twice went onto the bond market overnight. They couldn't find anybody to buy the bonds. Now, this is really unusual. It's really unusual because when the U.S. stock market drops down, people usually go into bonds as the safe haven, right? This didn't happen this time because what was happening is that people said, we don't trust U.S. bonds. We don't trust that they're secure now. Instead, they were going into German bonds. German bonds increased in value, decreased in yield, increased in price significantly. If you cannot sell U.S. bonds, if the U.S. government cannot sell U.S. bonds, they can't finance their debt. And on Wednesday morning, as Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan was saying, you're heading into recession, there were Trump advisors that went in and told Trump, this is the situation that you're in. Now, you want to ask me what he's going to do next. What he's done next is mixed. He has retreated on some of the tariffs, not all of them, but some of the tariffs. But at the same time, he can't appear to be weak. So he's played the tough guy approach specifically with China, right? Now I'm speaking to you on a Friday. What has happened since then? First of all, China has not backed down, right? Because China has not backed down, that meant that the rally in the U.S. stock market after his retreat is gone. The U.S. stock market dropped back on Thursday, and it's probably going to be lower today because the prospect is of a U.S.-China trade war, and a protracted U.S.-China trade war, according to international analysts, for example, at the World Bank, would lead to a 7% drop in global GDP if they keep doing this. U.S.-China trade is 3% of all total trade. So it's knock-on effects because it hurts the Chinese economy, it hurts the U.S. economy, so therefore they can't buy from Europe, they can't buy from Africa, etc. 7% drop in global GDP. And that's what Trump is embarking upon. Now, what he set himself up for is he's going to hit another fundamental decision point, which is as U.S. consumers, as U.S. manufacturers, as U.S. farmers, and as the U.S. stock market are taking the hit, does he back down again? Can he afford to back down again? And that means that what you have is not a planned genius approach. You effectively have an approach which has come down to this. Donald Trump and his inner circle, the warrior protectionists, were effectively the bully in the international playground. And they went into that playground and they said, pay us. Give us your lunch money. Canada said no. Mexico said no. China said no. Even the European Union, the weak old European Union, said no. And what does a bully get done when he is punched in the nose? He still has to act tough, but he either has to accept the fact that he didn't win, or he has to try it on again. And they're trying it on again with China, and I can't tell you how this comes out because we're in unprecedented territory. Oh, actually, I can tell you how it's going to. Actually, I can tell you it turns out on a wider scale. Sorry, Joe. Let me just add this. So, what are the Chinese going to do? And this goes back to the question time. The Chinese are going to go to the other countries and say, you trade with us, right? Earlier this week, Donald Trump threatened to put tariffs onto pharmaceuticals. into the United States. Now that affects Ireland a great deal, which I could talk to you about. But you know who else it affects? It affects India, one of the world's largest manufacturers of pharmaceuticals. Guess what the Indians then started talking about doing? We might have to talk to the Chinese about how we respond to this. The Japanese and the South Koreans have said we might have to consider how we coordinate a response to this, although South Korea has backed off just a bit. Canada is now talking to the European Union about how they can increase their trade relationship with the EU, and they're talking to the Australians about how they can increase military trade. What the Donald Trump is doing, in effect, is he's not bullying people into paying America. What they're saying here is we're all going to go to a different playground where the bully is not present. Now, there still will be sacrifice while that's being done. It won't be done. But you're talking about a reconfigured economy in which Donald Trump is putting the U.S. to the side. And that's an unprecedented situation. But the highest cost of that is not going to be paid by us in Ireland. It's not going to be paid by you in the UK. The highest cost of that is going to be paid by people in the U.S.
This tariff has already damaged the U.S. reputation. So, yeah, it is actually, to buy things that Chinese peasant manufacture. The U.S. imports massive volumes of goods, as we say, but they also have a lot of, they export a lot of their their service sector, those, the tech stuff, they're all service sectors. They export them and they have a trade surplus with the service sector. So, they look at this thing. This is what you call dumbness. Actually, I think I'm getting a bit. I mean, I'm going to put and talk about this, but I think it'll be probably not talk about this dumbness, because the dumbness. When you talk about dumbness, you try to argue about dumb stuff, you end up being dumb yourself. I don't want to make myself dumber arguing about dumbness stuff. But the U.S. imports massive volumes of goods.
Overall trade surplus with Ireland of 93 billion euros. So using Trump's logic, Ireland should be putting tariffs on the United States. But of course, they just took a number from the European Union, they slap it all in. So what I'm telling you is, from the very start, this project had nothing to do with tariffs. It has nothing to do with reciprocal tariffs. It was an attempt by the Trump people to get money, not from other countries, but to get money from American consumers and manufacturers and from farmers who would have to pay the tariffs. See, that was the strange thing. They weren't even getting money from China or the EU or whatever. They were taking it off of Americans and presenting it as a great victory against all these other countries. At 9:37 a.m. Washington time on Wednesday, Donald Trump goes on social media and says, now is a good time to buy. Now is a great time to buy DJT, okay, in all caps. There's an important backdrop to this. We now know that it appears that Trump made his decision that he would have to pull back on the tariffs, in part because of pressure from Republican senators, some of whom had been on Fox TV the previous night to tell him to back down, in part because of pressure from his own donors, including the billionaire like Bill Ackman, in part because other governments are telling him this is not working. But we know that in part because at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, he watched Fox TV, and a guy named Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan, who's one of the gurus of Wall Street, said, if you keep pressing on with these tariffs, you're going to get yourselves into a serious recession. At 8 a.m. 9:37 a.m. Now, we can't be certain that he had decided for sure to pull the tariffs back, but he goes, a tweet said in all caps. Now remember, now would be a great time to buy DJT. He usually does not sign his tweets on Truth Social DJT. What is DJT? DJT is the three-letter label for Donald Trump's media company on the NASDAQ stock exchange, 937. The decision to pull back on the tariffs to 10% is made at just after 1 p.m. from the White House, about 3.5 hours later. During the course of the day, beginning after the Trump tweet and before his announcement, stocks rise in Donald Trump's company. Just before the 1 p.m. announcement, there are a series of stock moves, what are called puts, which are to effectively buy the Trump stock now, get it now. After the announcement, the stock soars further. On Wednesday, Donald Trump's stock, DJT, went up 21.7%. If you bought that stock at the beginning of the day, you've got a 21.7% profit at the end of the day. Now, the Democrats, and here's one thing I'll add to this, the Democrats immediately say, all right, this is market manipulation. They say, look, a lot of Donald Trump's friends made money off of this. Donald Trump is on film on Wednesday after his announcement with people in the White House celebrating the fact this person made $500 million, this person made $900 million, this person made $1 billion today. Okay? I've asked 2 senior specialists in financial firms here in Ireland. I won't name them, I will keep this confident, but I asked them because I actually was working with them on various projects. I said, does this constitute spreading market-sensitive insider information, which is a crime? Does this constitute it? And both those people said 100%. The first one said, yeah, said this is a buy sign. This is a buy sign. He issued a buy sign. So if Donald Trump was not president of the United States, he would probably be investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. But here's the stinger in this. The Securities and Exchange Commission since January has been gutted. A lot of its staff have been fired, or they have been told to stop work or to halt litigation because it's part of ripping apart U.S. agencies. So the SEC, even if Trump was not president, might not be able to investigate it because they're no longer.
Ask ourselves, what has the globalist economy gotten the United States of America? And the answer is fundamentally it's based on 2 principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
The cycle is China lends the US money, the US spends it, and where's it spends it? You guess it, on Chinese goods. So what is he really criticizing here? What is the Vice President of the United States criticizing in this statement? So, global economic imbalances. America consumes a lot. China produces and saves. And America, when they consume things on credit cards. But China, they produce stuff and also they do save. So let's look at the U.S. dependency as well. On foreign labor, manufacturing, and debt financing. So that's what U.S. it depends on that foreign labor, and U.S. depends on that manufacturing of and also on debt financing. That their debt can be financed by China, notably China. But we know that the biggest holder of U.S. debt is Japan, but China is second. So also another thing about that. What is also he may be criticizing the lack of industrialization strategy, so that U.S. manufacturing jobs are being replaced by overseas supply chains. So that is also, this is a criticism on on the global economic imbalances, on U.S. dependency on the foreign labor force, on manufacturing and debt refinancing. And also, he actually criticizes the lack of industrial strategy in the U.S. I mean, U.S. is not the only one. A lot of these Western developed countries, they've actually abandoned their own industrialization strategy. A lot of stuff have actually been shipped elsewhere. And anyway, this is how global trade works. Anyway, I'm not saying for or against. I'm just pointing out the obvious, the elephant in the room. So now, why this code matter? So this code for Chinese peasant is it blends the economic populism with nationalism, which is the hallmark of the brand MAGA, That is the whole, when you look at that MAGA movement group in America, you see that the blend of economic populism with nationalism. Okay. It also reframes China as not as a threat, they're reframing China in this case, not as a threat, but as a critical enabler of US consumption and death, making US look vulnerable or even submissive. Or USA, my goodness, you're so vulnerable to China. It critiques a Wall Street globalization from that right-wing populist lens, from that part of the right-wing populist lens. So it critiques that. So it's so this is how he looks at it. So people might feel peasants or whatever. This is just to get you all on social media. Yada yada about peasant, use of the word peasant. But it is from that perspective. This is rhetoric, okay? This is just rhetoric, and it's rhetorical. It's rhetorical in the sense that it implies the implications of that Chinese peasant is the working class, the rural laborer, the factory workers, those who produce cheap labor, they save money, and those savings, they end up in USA debt via that state-controlled banks and sovereignty funds. That statement of the Chinese peasants. Okay, that's my take on the global trade. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time, see ya.